2:30 a.m. A wooded ridge in the dark hills of Tennessee. 3 slivers of light crawl up the slope. Not beams, slivers. The flashlights are wrapped in tape, choked down to a single bright slit, so that from a distance they read as nothing at all. Fireflies. A trick of the eye. At the front of the line, holding a pair of bolt cutters, is a woman in her 80s. Ahead of her stands the most secure nuclear site in the United States. Behind the trees, guard towers, 3 rings of fence, motion sensors, cameras, and a windowless white bunker holding enough bomb-grade uranium to build 10,000 warheads. Bolted to the chain link in front of her is a sign. It says deadly force is authorized. It means she can be shot where she stands. She raises the cutters to the wire. The first link parts with a soft metal snap, then another, then a gap wide enough for a body. She steps through. No siren, no spotlight, no shouted warning. No one comes. Hold on the impossible picture. The frailest person for 1,000 miles is standing inside the fence line of America's nuclear fortress. An 82-year-old Catholic nun in a windbreaker, and the most protected place in the country, has not so much as blinked. How is this happening? And how far is she about to get before someone, anyone, finally tries to stop her? Oak Ridge, Tennessee. A town that for years did not appear on the maps it was built to serve. During the Second World War, it was a secret city, conjured out of farmland to do one thing: enrich the uranium for the bomb that fell on Hiroshima. 70 years later, it is still here, and it is still the beating heart of America's nuclear stockpile. At its center sits the Y-12 National Security Complex, and inside Y-12 sits the building this entire story is about: the highly enriched uranium materials facility. The press has a nickname for it: the Fort Knox of uranium. Picture it: a $500 million bunker of white concrete with no windows, squatting behind 3 separate fences laced with motion detectors and cameras, guard towers, armed patrols, and those signs again and again along the wire, promising lethal force to anyone who crosses. The official line is simple and absolute: this is the hardest target in the United States. Nobody walks in here. That is the myth. Now meet the woman who is about to test it. Her name is Megan Rice. She is 82 years old. She is a Catholic nun, a sister of the Society of the Holy Child Jesus, and for most of her long life she was a science teacher and a missionary. She spent something like 4 decades in West Africa, in Nigeria and Ghana, teaching children in schools with dirt floors, the kind of person who measured her years in students rather than arrests. She is small. She is devout. She wears glasses and a gentle, certain smile that does not look capable of frightening anyone. She is also, by the summer of 2012, a woman who has already been arrested dozens of times and convicted 4 times, who once spent months in prison for stepping onto a nuclear test site in the Nevada desert. Somewhere in those years, the teacher became something else. She joined a movement called Plowshares, named for the line about beating swords into plowshares, whose members believe nuclear weapons are an absolute evil and that the way to confront them is not to argue, but to walk up and physically touch the machine peacefully and accept whatever comes. She does not believe the fortress is unbeatable. She believes the exact opposite. She believes it is a stage set, a bluff dressed up in concrete, and she is willing to die proving it. She is not alone. 2 men come with her, fellow Catholic peace activists, both older men with long records of their own. But understand from the start whose story this is. When the cameras come, and they will come, it is the 82-year-old nun the whole country will be looking at. She is the face. She is the scalpel. Sit with how strange this matchup is. On one side, the full weight of the American security state, billions of dollars, armed men, a building designed to survive the end of the world. On the other, an octogenarian nun and 2 fellow pacifists armed with flashlights, bolt cutters, and a Bible. This is not a heist crew with a clever plan to defeat the system. There is no plan to defeat anything. That is what makes it lethal. A thief wants to get in and out unseen. Rice wants the opposite. She wants to walk to the most sensitive wall in the country, stand against it in plain sight, and force the world to look. The breach is not the means to an end. The breach is the message. And that is precisely why she is the most dangerous possible person to send. Not because she is strong, because she is weak, old and harmless, and everyone can see it. If a commando team had cut that fence, the country could tell itself a comforting story. They were professionals. They were exceptional. The wall did its best against the worst. But an 82-year-old nun gives the country nowhere to hide. If she can do it, the wall does not work. Period. There is no version of the excuse that survives her. The instrument is chosen, whether she thinks of it this way or not, to leave the fortress no dignity at all. July 28, 2012. A little after 2 in the morning, they leave the cover of the trees and the first fence rises in front of them under the deadly force sign. The bolt cutters open, and the hardest target in America is about to discover it has no idea anyone is here. If this is supposed to be the most secure place in America, how did they get through the first fence without anyone noticing? And if the first layer failed so easily, how many more stand between them and the uranium? The cutters bite the first fence. Snap. A pause. They wait for the thing they have been warned about their whole lives. The floodlight, the loudspeaker, the truck. Nothing answers. So they widen the gap and step through onto restricted federal ground. They walk to the second fence. Snap. Silence again. This one is supposed to be wired, watched, alarmed. They cut it as if it were a backyard gate, and they pass through, deeper now, into the protected area, the zone where the rules say intruders are met with guns. They reach the third fence. Snap. And then they are inside. Standing on the secure ground of the highly enriched uranium materials facility, a few hundred feet from a bunker holding the raw material for 10,000 nuclear bombs. 3 fences, 3 cuts. Not one of them stopped by anything but the wire itself. Understand what each of those cuts is supposed to cost. Every one of those fences carried the same sign, the same promise, that crossing it could get you killed on sight. A woman in her 80s is reading that warning by the slit of a taped flashlight and then putting the blades to the wire anyway, fully expecting that the next sound she hears might be the last one. She is not betting that the guards will be merciful. She is betting that the guards will not be there. And with every fence that falls in silence, that terrible bet keeps paying off. Every step deepens the same question, and it stops being thrilling and starts being frightening. Where are the sensors? Where are the cameras? Where, in the name of everything, are the guards? Here is the answer, and here is the first crack in the myth. The cameras were old, some of them broken for months, with repair requests that went nowhere. Some of the detection equipment simply was not working that day, the kind of outage that should have frozen the whole site and instead was treated as routine. And in the months before, the contractor running security had cut its guard force to save money, trimming the very patrols that should have swept up 3 people in the dark long before they reached the wire. Investigators would later say it plainly. If those officers had still been walking their rounds, the intruders would have been picked up before they got anywhere close. There were even cameras that should have caught them, screens that a person was supposed to be watching. But here is the quiet rot under all of it. When the alarms did fire, the response was a shrug. And the alarms? The alarms had been crying wolf for years. False alert after false alert, animals and weather and glitches, until the people watching the screens learned the one lesson no one guarding a nuclear site should ever learn. They learned to ignore them. Feel the floor shift under the story. This is the moment the dread changes shape. Until now, you have been wondering whether the nun would get caught. Now you are wondering something far worse. Is anyone watching this place at all? Because the fortress is not being beaten. You cannot beat something that is not switched on. The walls are real. The towers are real. The signs threatening death are real. But behind them, the machine that is supposed to make the walls means something has quietly rotted, and no one above has noticed, because no one ever tried the door. They cross the last open ground, and then they are there, the white wall of the uranium bunker itself, blank and enormous in the dark, the most sensitive surface in the United States, and they are standing against it, alone, with all the time in the world. No one is coming. So they stop walking, they set down their bags, and they begin. How can 3 people cut through every security barrier without triggering a real response? And now that they've reached the bunker itself, What are they about to do? What happens next does not last a minute, or 10, or 20. It lasts 2 hours. For 2 hours, in the dead heart of the night, 3 pacifists do whatever they please against the wall of America's bomb-grade uranium store, and the fortress does not stir. They unroll banners and hang them. They string yellow crime scene tape across the concrete, as if to arrest the building itself. They open cans and spray paint slogans across the white wall. One of them reads, "The fruit of justice is peace." Then it gets stranger and more deliberate. They take out baby bottles. The bottles are filled with human blood, their own, carried in for exactly this, and they splash it across the bunker, dark streaks running down the wall of the most protected building in the country. They take up a hammer and they swing it at the corner of the fortress, chipping off small pieces of it, a frail old woman knocking literal chunks out of the symbol of American might. And while they do it, they pray. Now lift your eyes off the spray paint for 1 second and see the real picture, because it is the part that should make your stomach drop. This is not a parking lot. This is the nation's primary store of highly enriched uranium, the core ingredient of a nuclear weapon. And for 2 unbroken hours, it belonged to 3 people with hammers, banners, and a Bible. They could touch it. They could deface it. They could have stood there until sunrise. Here is the thought no one at Y12 wanted to say out loud afterward. If those 3 had not been peace activists who wanted to be seen, if they had been a trained team that wanted to never be seen, this was the nightmare. The single worst-case scenario in the entire architecture of American security, the one every dollar and every wall existed to prevent, had just played out in slow motion for 2 hours, with no one watching. Think about what 2 hours actually means against a target like this. 2 hours is not a sprint past a sleepy guard. 2 hours is enough time to study the wall, enough time to plant something, enough time for a team that knew what it wanted to begin the work of getting at the uranium itself. The thing that made this site the hardest target in the country was supposed to be that you could not get close to that material, not for 2 minutes, let alone 2 hours. The whole promise was time. The promise was that the layers would buy the guards the seconds they needed, and the layers had bought nothing at all. And here is the part that bites. The small black joke buried in the disaster. The whole point of those flashlights wrapped in tape, those careful little slits of light, was to avoid being seen. They needn't have bothered. They could have driven up with the high beams on. There was no one there to see. If true stories that sound impossible are the reason you are still here, this is the channel that goes looking for them. And the button down there is how the next one finds you. The story has stopped being charming. The fortress is not just unlocked. It has been painted, taped, bloodied, and hammered, loudly, for hours. And the country's most dangerous building has slept through every minute of it. And then, far off across the dark complex, 2 points of light appear. Headlights. A single security vehicle is rolling toward them, slow, out of the night. After hours of impossibility, after fence upon fence and silence upon silence, someone is finally coming. And every one of those signs along the wire said the same thing about what happens to trespassers here. The truck stops. A door opens. A guard steps out. Will the nun be shot? She is not shot. What happens instead diffuses the moment and, in the same breath, sets a far bigger charge. The guard is a man named Kirk Garland. He has come alone to investigate, and he steps out of his vehicle to find 3 people, one of them an elderly woman standing against the most sensitive wall in America beside puddles of blood and dripping graffiti. By every rule of his job, this should be a violent, terrifying confrontation. The activists do not run. They do not fight. They turn to him, calm, and offer him food. They have brought bread, and then, softly, in the dark, they begin to sing. Garland does the human thing. He does not draw down on a singing nun. He detains them peacefully, and he calls it in. The breach is over. The 3 are in custody, and that, the contractor surely thought in the first hour, was the end of it. It was the beginning of the worst of it. Because by morning, the photographs were out. Blood and slogans smeared across the wall of the bomb-grade uranium fortress. The Fort Knox of uranium, desecrated for 2 hours by an 82-year-old nun. The press did not need to exaggerate. They simply called it what it was: the biggest security breach in the history of the nation's atomic complex. The fallout came fast and total. Y-12 was shut down. Operations at the heart of America's nuclear stockpile stopped while the country tried to understand how this had happened. Security forces were pulled in and retrained from the ground up. Investigators and inspectors descended on Oak Ridge. There were hearings in Washington where officials were made to explain on the record how 3 unarmed people, including an elderly nun, had reached the nation's bomb-grade uranium and held it for 2 hours. And the contractors who had been paid to keep the unkeepable safe, the firm running operations, and the firm running the guards, lost their contracts. Terminated. There is a detail here that tells you exactly how unthinkable the breach was. Some of the guards, hearing that an elderly nun had walked to the bunker wall, flatly did not believe she had done it alone. The only way it made sense to them was inside help. Somebody must have killed the cameras. Somebody must have pulled the patrols. They could not accept the simpler, more terrifying explanation that the fortress had needed no traitor to fail, because it was already failing on its own. They went looking for a conspiracy because the truth that the most protected place in America had simply stopped working was harder to believe than sabotage. No one opened a door for her. The door had been open the whole time. And then comes the beat that should make you angry, because it is the moment the system turns on the wrong person. Kirk Garland, the guard who actually showed up, who caught them, who kept 3 people and a nuclear bunker from turning into a bloodbath, is first praised for it. Then, 2 weeks later, he is fired. His own summary of it is hard to forget. He stopped them. He detained them. He testified about it. Nobody got hurt. And he is the one who lost his job. He would say he was made the scapegoat for a failure that ran far above him, the convenient single name to pin on a collapse that belonged to the entire institution. But the institution was not finished overreaching, not even close. Faced with a humiliation of its own making, the government had 2 roads. It could quietly admit the fortress had rotted and fix it, or it could turn its full weight on the 3 people who had embarrassed it and make them pay for the embarrassment. It chose the second road, and it did not charge them with trespassing. It charged them with sabotage, intent to injure the national defense of the United States. A felony built for spies and saboteurs in time of war, carrying the threat of decades behind bars. Prosecutors described the defendants as recidivists, habitual offenders, as though the danger to America were a nun with a hammer and not the open fence she had strolled through. Let the size of that sink in. An 82-year-old woman who damaged nothing of military value, who hurt no one, who waited calmly to be arrested and sang to the man who arrested her, is now being prosecuted as an enemy of the nation, facing the rest of her natural life in a federal prison. The trial comes. The jury delivers, guilty of sabotage. And the moment the word lands, the consequences are immediate and cold. Because of the gravity of a sabotage conviction, the 3 are not allowed to go home to wait for sentencing. They are taken into federal custody on the spot, denied bond, locked up while their appeal grinds forward. The nun who exposed the fortress is now caged inside the system she exposed. She won the breach. She lost her freedom. And the trap, the real one, the one the concrete walls never managed, has finally snapped shut on her. Who will ultimately pay the price for one of the biggest security failures in American history? And why will the government choose to prosecute an elderly nun as if she were an enemy of the nation? Before there is any release, the vice turns one more time, and it turns by her own hand. At her sentencing, Megan Rice refuses to play the part the courtroom expects. She does not plead for mercy. She does not ask the judge to spare a frail old woman. She asks for the opposite. She asks for no leniency at all. To stay in prison for the rest of her life, she tells the court, would be the greatest gift he could give her. The judge does not grant the gift. He gives her 35 months. Her 2 co-defendants get 62 each, longer than hers, plus restitution for the wall they defaced, in order to repay the government for the paint and the blood and the chips of concrete. And so an 82-year-old nun is led off to federal prison for the crime of embarrassing the United States government. Her beliefs exactly as they were the night she picked up the bolt cutters, unchanged, unbroken, unrepentant. There is a grim symmetry to it that the prosecutors never seem to feel. The same system that could not muster a single guard to stop her in 2 hours could, once she was in handcuffs, summon the full machinery of federal justice to put her away. It had unlimited resources for the punishment and almost none for the protection. The wall failed. The cell did not. This is the point where most stories about a small person against a vast institution simply end. The little one loses. The wall wins. Roll credits on the injustice. This story does not end there, because the appeal reaches the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the court does something the whole video has been quietly building toward. It looks at the sabotage conviction, the charge that she intended to injure the national defense of the United States, and it throws it out. The opinion, written by Judge Raymond Kethledge, contains a single sentence that detonates the government's entire case and reframes every minute you have watched. It reads, "It takes more than bad publicity to injure the national defense." The court found that no rational jury could conclude these three people, cutting fences and praying and hanging banners, ever intended to harm America's defense. They were embarrassed by it. They humiliated it. They exposed it. They did not injure it, because there was nothing in their hammers and their blood and their slogans that touched the country's actual ability to defend itself. Hear what that ruling really says, stripped of the legal language. The government's own court stood up and confirmed the thesis that this nun had been shouting with her body since 2:30 that morning. She damaged no defense. The only thing she ever damaged was the illusion of one. The collapse is total. The sabotage conviction is vacated, and with it the long sentences built on top of it. The court sends the case back down and notes the obvious. The 2 years the three had already spent locked up was far more than the leftover property charge could ever justify. There is nothing left to hold them on. The doors open and Megan Rice walks out free. The government, having been told by its own appeals court that its centerpiece charge was hollow, does not press the fight. Read that sequence one more time because it is the whole story in miniature. The state called her a saboteur. The state's own court said no. The most powerful prosecutorial machine on earth swung its hardest charge at a nun, and a panel of federal judges looked at the evidence and said, in effect, that the only thing she had injured was the government's pride. The breach was never a crime against national security. It was the exposure of its absence, and now that was the official record. Now, be honest about the cost, because this is not a clean victory, and the channel will not pretend it is. The breach did force a real reckoning. The fortress that should have been secured for decades was finally, actually secured, because a nun proved it wasn't. Contracts were torn up, careers ended, the machine got fixed, but it only got fixed because she broke in to show it was broken. And the man who caught her, Kirk Garland, the one human being that night who did his job, never got it back. So look again at the picture we started with. The slivers of light, the bolt cutters, the frail woman under the deadly force sign walking unopposed toward 10,000 bombs worth of uranium. It was never a story about how strong she was. She was 82. She weighed almost nothing. She could not have forced her way past a single competent guard. The fortress did not fall to her strength. It fell because it was hollow, held together by nothing more than the assumption that no one would ever be foolish enough or faithful enough to test it. She called the bluff. And when she did, the most secure place in America had no answer except to lock up the person who told the truth about it. She walked out at 85, still certain she had been right, and she lived another 6 years. Megan Rice died in 2021 at the age of 91. So here's the question that will keep people arguing long after this video ends. When one person stands against a system powerful enough to crush them, what matters more? Whether they broke the rules or whether they exposed the truth? Because Megan Rice isn't the only person who ever tested the limits of a seemingly untouchable system. The woman in our next story faced something even more unforgiving than a nuclear security apparatus. She faced North Korea. She was captured, repatriated, sent to labor camps, and told over and over that she would never escape again. And then she escaped, again and again. By the age of 20, Ginny Jo had escaped North Korea 5 times and helped dozens of others follow behind her. If you thought this story was unbelievable, Click here and watch the true story of the only person known to have escaped North Korea 5 times.